sense consciousness versus spiritual consciousness. What is the difference? Because by knowing the difference, you can actually make sure that you learn to work more effectively with your own consciousness itself. Ultimately, all of life's problems are due to how we're using our own minds. Now, at first it might make no sense. We might see all kinds of reasons purely physically, why something is not the way we like it, or why something can't seem to improve, or why something is entirely bad for us. And we might be very right. In certain circumstances, there are stuff that happens to us physically at times that was not really in our control, and then we might feel bad about it. But regardless, to know the difference between sense consciousness and spiritual consciousness can be very liberating for the soul on this journey that we're on. Because, simply put, sense consciousness means that you let your mind, the way you think and feel, be controlled by what your senses are dictating. So, essentially, when circumstances, for example, show you a particular situation, you might have a certain response to that. Someone says something bad to you, you might feel bad because you're allowing the senses to influence your way of thinking. Perhaps you're having some difficulty financially at the time. Well, then the money in the bank account or the debts that you're having could potentially control your mind in that regard and make you feel worried and bad about your finances. When it is relationships, if there's issues in that you're having with your partner, with your children, or maybe family members, whatever it is, work, colleagues, then again, it's people that you observe and are in contact with through the senses. So sense consciousness basically means that you're allowing your mind to be controlled by everything that's going on around you. But then you have spiritual consciousness. Now, what is spiritual consciousness? You have to basically understand what spirituality is in this regard. Spirituality, the way I would describe it and approach it, has everything to do with the non-physical side of your existence. So then you're working with stuff like your thoughts, your feelings, your intuition. These are all spiritual experiences within ourselves, subjective things that we experience. Therefore, we can call them spiritual by nature. Now, that's interesting because the spiritual side of yourself is God-given. It gives you the ability to think independent of circumstances. It gives you the ability to feel independent of circumstances, and it also gives you the ability through your intuition to attract insights, sometimes of a very divine, wonderful nature, of a true soul nature that goes beyond the whole physical world. So spiritual consciousness in that regard means to live consciously, deliberately, through your own awareness itself. Now, this might still be a bit bizarre to most people, but really now, if you stand in a certain circumstance of your life, especially if it's negative, to realize that you still can decide whether you're going to think badly because of it or to feel negatively because of it, is a huge leap of growth, a huge sign of growth of your own consciousness itself. Really think about this. Really stop and think about how many people actually instantly let their minds be controlled by something that's happening physically around them. And yet spiritual consciousness says, even though bad stuff might be happening around me, even though I might perceive it through my senses, I'm not going to let it control my mind. And when you learn to exercise this sort of discipline for yourself, then you're developing spiritual consciousness. Then you're making yourself more stronger, spiritually speaking, because you're learning to work with the invisible forces of your own existence, of your own consciousness. Can you see what I'm getting at? Sense consciousness will hold you back. It will make you feel limited. Spiritual consciousness will break you free. It will make you feel unlimited, because there is no limit to the thoughts that you can think. Who can say where the limit is to thinking? As far as we know, there is none. You can keep going on and on in a positive, uplifting, liberating direction with your consciousness if you open up your heart, which means your intuition, soul intuition. Or you can go into a limited way by letting your consciousness completely be blocked and boxed in by the senses, of your current physical body. If you stop and think about this for yourself during your days, you will find that there's a power inside of you that can always ease your suffering. Because even if you have worries of a financial nature, or with friendships or family or work or whatever it is, yes, they may be valid worries. In a way, there may be valid reasons why you could say, well, I should worry about this, or this is why I feel bad about it, and that's why I feel bad. And then you have all these reasons, right? You rationalize the feeling bad inside your consciousness. But if you can recognize, wait a minute, this may be bad at first glance as I look at it, as I go through this experience, it might be a bad thing. But what could I learn from it? What can I learn from this situation? What is it revealing to me? Because in order to learn a lesson behind anything that is negative in life, you're going to have to use the spiritual side of your own very essence, which goes beyond the physical, which perceives and receives from God divine intuition and divine revelations. So you might realize, usually, as you look back on reflection of negative situations, that they taught you a lesson, didn't you? I mean, I've had those. I've had some brutal things happen in my life that were absolutely morbid initially when I went through them, but then afterwards it's like, but I did learn a lesson. I did actually perceive that I should approach this situation from this angle from now on. If I ever find myself in similar situations, I know a better way of going about them. And that happened through spiritual awareness, by becoming spiritually more aware of the situation, by exercising the freedom of my own thoughts and feelings, allowing myself to perceive the best ends in spite of the negativity. That is exercising the spiritual side of your personality. So when you are facing difficulties, always remember that there is a way out, but the way might not be clear through your senses alone. So using the senses to do your thinking for you can be very detrimental in the long term. But opening your heart and mind towards God, which means infinity, allowing the spiritual side of you to take over, it will then help you to perceive your situation from a completely different angle. You see, I've had certain things in my life where they were so heartbreaking to me, I would feel so sad about them, I might cry about them, I might be upset about them in any way, whatever it was. And then after a while, if I meditate on it and really contemplate the situation calmly and more clearly from a spiritual perspective, I realized, but man, it taught me a great lesson though. It was a hard lesson, and perhaps you could reason, well, if I had been smarter, I would never have gotten myself in certain situations and I would not have faced these painful experiences perhaps. But at the end of the day, we're all still learning as human beings. I mean, that's the thing. We will sin, as the Bible says. Sin might sound like something extreme where you have to do such huge destructive things that we might not realize that we're sinning because we're not doing such evil, extremely evil things. You can think up for yourself what that might all entail, but sinning simply means to miss the mark, to not live up to the highest good that your intuition is telling you. So sometimes we make these mistakes as human beings on this planet. But to realize that you made the mistake means you can also consciously work on rectifying it, on consciously redeeming yourself, on repenting. Repentance means essentially to go from sense consciousness with its limitations to spiritual consciousness with its unity to God, with God itself. Isn't that beautiful? Because I can't describe in words how much your life would change if God, through your own spiritual nature and spiritual awareness, starts to guide your life, because you can never go wrong. You see, God being the creator of the whole universe, we could then reason, well, then he can also provide all the answers and solutions you would need in order to proceed in a wonderful way with your life. But if we don't have the spiritual first in our lives, if we don't develop this spiritual awareness, then we're going to allow the senses to control our way of thinking, and then we'll also be limited. You see, another way of saying sense consciousness is like living to what the masses have taught you about life. Now, at one point, hopefully in the future, whenever it is, the masses will become more and more spiritually aware overall, and this will all be more like commonplace. All these kinds of topics that we're discussing to this channel would be commonplace. That would be good for humanity. But now we know, even now, in this day and age, and it was even in the Bible the case, you could read it, people would always criticize and judge spiritual teachings. Why? Because they're living through sense consciousness. They're putting their sense perceptions, their physical life above the spiritual. But yet that is not the way it should be. You put the spiritual first and then let it control the physical side of your life. Because the spiritual side is that part of you that connects you with God. Therefore, by being connected in that manner, inwardly, and then approaching your life outwardly from that foundation, you will always have the best perceptions available to you. So then you might go through bad experiences, but because of your connection to God, it will help you to perceive way faster a wonderful lesson that could be learned for you in particular in this situation. And when the lesson is learned, you'll actually be grateful, even though the experience might have been painful to your human self. That is the beauty of perceiving the difference between sense consciousness and spiritual consciousness. How do you develop more spiritual consciousness? Well, it's simply through the act of withdrawing your attention from the physical world. How do we do it? Normally we do that by going to sleep at night. Then we drop unconscious. We start dreaming, and the dreams are already manifestations of the spiritual side of life. So if you want to develop spiritual consciousness willingly and with awareness, well, then you have to also withdraw your consciousness deliberately yourself. And that is done through something as simple as meditation. Sitting down, closing your eyes, and calming down the mind. Calming down it so much that all the worries of the physical side of your existence start to temporarily fade off of your consciousness, and you start to feel this peace within yourself. If you learn to calm down your mind, you will find peace within the very heart of yourself, and you realize that everything will be alright. Then from that peaceful state of consciousness, you'll always be able to think more effectively about anything that you would be facing physically. Really think about that. If you try to solve a problem, physically speaking, while being in a chaotic state of mind, it's never gonna work. Or if it does work, it's gonna feel like it takes so much effort. It's just gonna be so annoying at times. It's not gonna be fun to really work on your life. But if you make your mind calm, if you become the master of your mind through meditation, by sitting down, focusing on your breathing, whatever you need to do in order to calm down yourself and your thinking about physical things, then you learn to awaken your intuition. Then in that stillness of mind, you can start to sense what you should be doing in order to improve your life, what you should be doing in order to improve a situation, whatever it is. I've had this happen to me all the time. If I take the time to actually meditate, which sometimes throughout the years I have forgotten, I will not deny it. I have gone off track myself at times. But then you get back on track of this meditation, of learning to focus on the spiritual side of your own being. Learning to focus on your intuition, to trust in what God is revealing to you inwardly through visions and dreams as well. Then you be guided straight out of the darkness of your physical life, of the ignorance that resides there, that is keeping you back. To obey sense consciousness is an act of ignorance. To obey spiritual consciousness is an act of wisdom, and it is divine wisdom at that. Because even if people treat you extremely badly, no matter what they do to you, even Jesus Christ on the cross said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." You can only do such things, have such attitudes towards others, if you're spiritually aware, if you can see the unity that exists behind all of life. So if bad things happen, instead of being sad and feeling upset about them for no matter how long it is, you want to learn to perceive the message, the lesson in it as fast as you can, because then you can outgrow it while you're at it. Then it won't hold you down. Then you're like, oh, I had this issue with this person, or I had this issue with these finances in my life. They really intimidated me. I had all these debts. I didn't know what to do. But then I opened up my mind towards God, which is spiritual consciousness, and it revealed to me a way to grow out of it, and it also revealed to me how to avoid it from now on, so I learned a lesson. Can you see what we're getting at? Really think about this for yourself. Are you operating through sense consciousness? Or are you developing your own spiritual consciousness? Because yours is the choice.